Welcome to the deep dive. If you spend any time really looking at modern debates, political, cultural, even just scrolling through social media, something jumps out.
Yeah, it really goes.
It's all fundamentally dominated by questions of identity, isn't it? You know, who we are deep down, what our true feelings tell us, whether the world is, well, properly validating our authentic self.
It's absolutely the air we breathe now. Thinkers like Philip Rieff spotted this decades ago, didn't they? This shifts from, say, religious man or political man to what he called psychological man.
And Charles Taylor's expressive individual,
Yeah.
same idea, right? Your inner landscape becomes the authority, the thing that defines what's right for you.
Exactly. But what you need to grasp is that this focus on the psychological self, it didn't just, materialize from nowhere. It has a very clear intellectual history, a genealogy.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. Tracing that story back to its, well, pivotal source in the 18th century, focusing on this incredibly explosive, contradictory, but profoundly influential figure, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, sometimes called the other Genevan.
Oh, Rousseau's impact is just immense, almost hard to overstate. His thinking is practically woven into the fabric of the modern West.
He's a father figure for Romanticism, definitely.
Absolutely. A key intellectual force behind the French Revolution.
Yeah.
And his ideas even echo later in people like, well, Freud and psychoanalysis.
Yeah.
If you're looking for the original blueprint for our modern psychological self-understanding, our sources really point to Rousseau as the, quote, aboriginal paradigm for psychological man.
And he kicks this whole thing off, maybe surprisingly, not in some dense political work, but in his autobiography, The Confessions. He starts with this line that's just, wow, it really sets the stage for the next 2 centuries. He says something like, I want to show my fellow man a man in all the truth of nature, and this man is to be myself.
It's utterly revolutionary for its time. I mean, this wasn't just a diary of trips or jobs. He's explicitly reframing what autobiography is. It's a psychological exploration. He's announcing that the real story, the essential truth about a person, isn't just the external stuff, what you did. No, it's found in the inner life, the history of my soul, as he put it. That immediate turn inward, looking inside for reality, that's really the starting gun for our whole modern way of thinking about the self.
Okay, let's really unpack this central Rousseau idea. Man is born good, society corrupts him. He uses these vivid, sometimes flawed, maybe even self-serving stories in the Confessions to make his case.
Yeah, the theft stories are absolutely key here. You have to remember the one about the asparagus. Young Rousseau gets talked into stealing asparagus from his mother's garden by an older guy, M. Verrat, so they can sell it.
And the crucial part, the really interesting bit, is why he says he did it. He insists it wasn't greed. He didn't even particularly want the asparagus. He says he did it, quote, only to oblige the person who was making me do it.
Precisely. The initial impulse, wanting to be agreeable, helpful, do a favor for a friend that's basically good, driven by natural sympathy. But society, represented by this older man and the whole situation, it twists that good impulse into a bad act. The sin, so to speak, is external. It comes from outside.
And the source material does a fantastic job here,
Oh.
drawing that direct comparison to the other really famous theft in philosophy, Augustine stealing the pears. That contrast just lays it all out.
Oh, absolutely. If you remember Augustine's Confessions, he and his buddies raid a neighbor's orchard. But Augustine is brutally honest about it. The pears, not even good. He said they weren't attractive, didn't taste great. They just chucked them to the pigs.
So why do it?
For Augustine, it was the thrill of doing wrong itself. The sheer perverse joy in breaking the rule. Just because it was a rule, it was proof, for him, of an inherent moral flaw, original sin. He believed he was fundamentally inclined towards wickedness from birth.
So Augustine looks inside and points the finger at himself. He's inherently flawed, and there's this external divine law he's failed.
Exactly. But Rousseau, he looks inside and says, no, wait. Fundamentally, I'm good, I'm sound. Points the finger outward at society. The corruption, the bad act, it stems from social pressures, from expectations, from the whole setup of civilization. And this framework society as the source of lies, of inauthenticity, that's the bedrock of the psychological self he's building. The original impulse of nature is right, he thinks, but culture makes us lose touch with it.
He had this sort of clarifying moment, too, didn't he, with the prostitute. Giulietta, in Venice. He meets her, and at first he completely idealizes her, sees her as this almost classical goddess figure, but he feels totally inadequate and nervous around her.
Right. And then, as they get closer, he notices this tiny, almost irrelevant physical flaw. One of her nipples isn't perfectly formed, and boom, instantly, the whole illusion just shatters.
Yeah.
She goes from goddess to, in his mind, a vicious monster. Just like that. A complete psychological reversal.
But the real insight comes later, right? When he reflects on it. He realizes Giulietta wasn't a goddess or a monster. Her situation, her life as a prostitute, her supposed corruption that was down to social circumstances, economics, not some innate flaw tied to her body.
That's it. He saw that his own imagination, shaped by society's warped ideas about beauty and vice, was the thing that mystifies and thereby hides the real causes of corruption. It wasn't her, it was his perception, trained by a bad system.
And that realization is huge. Once he sees how society messes with our heads, our perceptions, he's basically set on his life's work to systematically critique society itself.
Which leads right into his big intellectual breakthrough moment, that famous walk to Vincennes to visit his friend Diderot, who was imprisoned.
Right, and he sees the essay contest prompt from the Academy of Dijon.
Yeah. Whether the restoration of the sciences and arts has contributed to the purification of morals, has civilization made us better people, basically?
And Rousseau's answer was this massive no.
Right.
A total bombshell at the time.
A resounding no. He argued the complete opposite. Arts, sciences, civilization itself, they actually breed hypocrisy and vice. But crucially, to make that argument stick, he needed a starting point, a baseline measure of human goodness. And that's where his concept of the state of nature comes in.
And we should probably stress this for you listening. Rousseau's state of nature isn't meant as literal history. He wasn't saying back in 10,000 BC.
Not at all. It's a purely theoretical tool.
Yeah.
A thought experiment designed specifically to critique the culture he lived in.
Okay.
He imagines this simple, primitive state, people living naturally. And the key thing is, in that state, there's no gap between your inner self and your outer presentation. Needs are simple, desires are simple, they get satisfied simply. In the state of nature, what you see is basically what you get with people. There's no performance.
Now, contrast that with, say, 18th century Paris, or frankly, 21st century anywhere. Rousseau looked around and saw, as he put it, a vile and deceiving uniformity prevails in our morals. One no longer dares to appear what one is.
Exactly. You're constantly being watched, judged. You're under this perpetual pressure to conform, to suppress your real feelings and desires, to fit in with what society expects.
And that pressure, that constant hiding, is miserable.
It's agonizing. It leads to hypocrisy, fear, betrayal, always holding back. To be accepted, and we all have that deep need, you have to ditch your simple, natural inclinations and play by society's complicated, corrupt rules. So the individual becomes, well, inauthentic, alienated from their true good self, living a lie, essentially.
This alienation, this split, brings us right to probably the most critical distinction in his whole philosophy. It shapes how we think about ambition, competition, self-worth, these two kinds of love.
Yes, absolutely crucial. First, there's amour de soi-même, we usually translate it as self-love. This one's innate, it's simple, it's fundamentally good. It's just that basic drive for self-preservation, perfectly balanced with our actual needs. That's what you have in the state of nature. It's healthy, benign.
Okay, simple self-preservation. But then there's the other one, amour propre.
Amour propre. This is the problem child. Rousseau calls it a relative sentiment, factitious and born in society. It's not simple self-love. It's this complex need to be valued in comparison to others. It's about how others see you.
So it kicks in the moment people gather and start noticing things like, oh, he's the best singer, or she's the most beautiful, or he's the most respected.
Precisely. That desire for public esteem, for rank, for being regarded better than others, that, for Rousseau, is the root of all social evil. It's the cancer.
Because it creates needs that are fundamentally competitive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're relational. They can't possibly be satisfied for everyone all the time. If your happiness depends on being the best dancer, well, then everyone else has to be worse. This endless cycle of comparison, rivalry, wanting more status, that's the engine of corruption, ambition, inequality, and ultimately it pulls you away from your true authentic self.
So if the whole social game is built on this corrupted foundation of amour propre, then you can't really rely on external laws or customs for true morality, which forces Rousseau to locate ethics somewhere else, inside, in the psychological realm, which gets us to sentiment and freedom.
Right. He grounds morality in a natural feeling. Pity or empathy. He sees it as this innate reluctance to see another creature suffer. It's a natural virtue, he thinks, that comes before reason.
So because we naturally feel bad seeing others suffer, we're naturally inclined to help, to be generous.
That's the idea. In the state of nature, this empathy acts like a natural law, keeping things mostly decent without needing formal rules or police. Moral action flows from an emotional response, a feeling, not from following an external code.
Okay, which makes the idea of conscience incredibly important for him. He really develops this through the character of the Savoyard vicar in his educational novel, Emile.
Yes. The vicar describes conscience as an innate principle of justice and virtue. More than that, it's a divine instinct, immortal and celestial voice. It's literally God's voice inside you, your internal moral compass.
And if you just listen to that voice, you'd be truly free and authentic. The only reason conscience isn't the omnipotent governor of our lives, Rousseau argues, is because all the noise and corruption of society drowns it out.
Which leads to his really radical definition of what true moral freedom actually is. It's not about being free from rules, it's about freedom within.
How so?
True freedom, for Rousseau, is enslaving yourself willingly to the eternal laws written in the depth of his heart by conscience and reason. The only real slave, he says, is the person who does evil because they're acting against their own true nature, their own internal divine programming.
Wow. So liberty isn't primarily about government structures or external rights anymore. It's about this inner alignment. It's about what Taylor called self-determining freedom.
Exactly. The idea that you are genuinely free only when you decide for yourself what matters, based on that inner voice, breaking free from those external societal pressures that try to dictate your values, accessing truth becomes primarily an inward journey.
And that core idea, truth found by consulting the self, I mean, it's just completely saturated our world today, hasn't it?
Utterly colonized it, which sets the stage perfectly for looking at Rousseau's legacy, much of which goes totally unacknowledged. The concepts we've just been talking about, they become just,
Yeah.
well, the commonplace assumptions of Western culture.
Okay, like what? Give us the big ones.
Well, first, that immediate tendency to psychologize identity.
Yeah.
The belief that your inner life, that history of the soul, is the deepest, most real, most defining thing about you as a person.
Right. And second, relatedly, that core assumption that when things go wrong for an individual, the primary blame lies with society, culture, nurture, not fundamentally with the individual themselves.
You see that everywhere, don't you? It shapes how we approach education, focusing on self-esteem, how we discuss crime, looking at societal causes, how we talk about personal happiness. It's about finding the right environment to be your true self. Society is nearly always framed as the antagonist.
The main problem, yeah.
And maybe most critically, his whole framework for authenticity, the idea that you're most real, most good, when you act out your inner psychological convictions, that really is the necessary philosophical precondition, as the sources put it, for modern identity politics.
You can really see the direct line, can't you? When you look at contemporary identity movements, especially where the absolute priority is placed on the inner voice, the person's deep psychological sense of self, and that inner conviction is seen as needing liberation from all external constraints, sometimes including even the physical body itself. Well, that aligns perfectly with the Rousseauian ideal, doesn't it? True identity is psychological, and it needs to be free from external, inauthentic cultural rules.
It's a direct inheritance. And you see echoes in maybe subtler ways, too. Think about the modern sort of cult of youth.
How so?
Well, if society corrupts, and if corruption increases over time through exposure to society, then, logically, youth must be wiser, purer, closer to that original innate innocence of nature before the rot fully sets in.
Ah, right. So old age isn't necessarily seen as a source of wisdom, but potentially as a state of greater corruption or myopia.
Exactly, and that's partly why you get this phenomenon sometimes of serious platforms presenting children or teenagers as moral authorities, lecturing older generations on incredibly complex issues like climate change or geopolitics.
Because the underlying, often unspoken assumption is that their youth grants them a kind of authentic insight, unclouded by societal corruption.
Precisely. It's Rousseau's premise playing out as a cultural norm.
Yeah.
And one last one, the anti-historical tendency. If society and its institutions corrupt, then history itself becomes suspect. It's not a repository of wisdom to learn from, but largely a chronicle of oppression, constraint, and the systematic crushing of natural goodness.
So the idea of being on the right side of history often implies rejecting or overthrowing historical practices and institutions because they're seen as inherently corrupting.
Yeah, they're viewed as obstacles to authenticity, not foundations.
It really is incredible when you lay it out like that. So summing up, Rousseau basically handed us the vocabulary, the whole conceptual framework for seeing ourselves as intrinsically good at heart, fundamentally victims of social corruption, and only truly authentic, truly ourselves when we act according to that inner psychological voice.
He absolutely did. But, and this is the crucial final point for you to really chew on, Rousseau's original system, as radical as it was, had a built-in safety net. He was saved from just dissolving into total anarchic moral relativism,
Hmm.
the kind of emotional anything goes we sometimes see now, because he held firmly to two big ideas.
Which were
First, he absolutely believed in a stable, universal human nature. Deep down, everyone was programmed the same way. And second, he believed that God-given conscience, that inner voice, spoke the same objective moral truth to everybody.
okay. So those universals, universal nature, universal conscience, they provided a stable foundation. Even though ethics was rooted in feeling, the feelings like pity and the inner guide, conscience, were fundamentally the same for all.
Exactly. They anchored the whole system. So the provocative question we're left with is this. What happens when our culture fully embraces Rousseau's ideal of self-determining freedom, this intensely subjective psychological way of defining the self, and the ethics based purely on personal sentiment? But we simultaneously ditch the very concepts that gave his system its stability.
Meaning we deny the existence of a stable, universal human nature or an objective, universally accessible conscience.
Right, what happens then? That's the closing question.
Yeah.
And maybe, just maybe, the consequences are what we're all navigating right now.